Well, a core philosophy of journalism: to understand the situation, you have to narrow the distance between you and the story to get there, to show what's going on, often at considerable personal risk. Adrian Blomfield is a senior foreign correspondent at the Daily Telegraph, one of the very few journalists who reported recently from the Strait of Hormuz. He's back from his on-the-ground boat deployment on the Omani side of the Strait, and he joins us now. Adrian, welcome to France 24. It is great to have you with us. Tell us about where you went, what you were seeing.
So we went out in a small boat hugging the coast of the Musandam Peninsula, and we went out into the narrowest point of the Strait of Hormuz, where it's about 21 nautical miles, roughly the same distance as from Dover to Calais across the channel. It was unclear what we were going to see because it hasn't been reported on that much. We've obviously seen a lot of the satellite data. But one of the things that one sort of gets a sense of when you're out on the water is just how much more complicated the picture is. Because apart from the ships that are at anchor unable to move through the strait, one of the things that we saw was that there was a lot of traffic moving across the strait, primarily in the form of about 300 small speedboats that we saw bouncing along the water from where we saw they were coming from Bandar Abbas in Iran, heading towards the Gulf. Unfortunately, we don't have as many pictures as we would have liked. We would not been allowed to show them for security reasons. But nonetheless, that was the picture that we saw, one of the most striking things when we were on the strait. And that in itself is telling because it shows you how easy those small boats were, primarily smugglers, small boats bringing fuel from Iran. But within that enormous maritime traffic that's going across the strait, you can see just how easy it is for IRGC speedboats to hide in plain sight, whether that's for scouting operations, mining operations, or boarding operations. It just gives you a little bit of a glimpse of the complex nature of the Strait of Hormuz.
That's fascinating. It's worth saying that these images we're seeing, apart from obviously that's you on the strait as well, are from separate agencies, not the images that you said you weren't allowed to take. But let's talk about those speedboats, 300. So this is in the space of just a few days, I think 2-3 days. And I've heard you say they were more often than not loaded with oil. Is there a kind of a smuggler's boom in the main going on right now as a result of the competitive blockade?
Well, this is an interesting aspect to it because before this was certainly a problem for Iran. So Iran heavily subsidizes diesel and petrol in order to try and keep prices lower for its own restive population. And obviously we saw all of those protests in January. And that creates enormous opportunities for arbitrage to sell something at a much more expensive price on the other side. So you take the boats across 21 miles, you've got them loaded with drums of diesel or petrol, and the markup on the Arabian side of the Gulf can be 500 to even 1,000%.
Wow.
And so that was a big problem for the Iranian economy. It has been for a long time, and boats were going to places like Pakistan as well, because they were subsidizing other countries. So it was a very inefficient way of managing your most important resource. It's now slightly different because obviously Iran is running out of storage. So in some ways, if you can increase this boat traffic, it's not going to do that much. We've been told that possibly 75,000 barrels is crossing a day in these small boats. And maybe that is possible. That's probably only going to alleviate some of that pressure by about 4 or 5%. But yes, when I said 300, I mean, that was in the space of a couple of hours. This was, they're coming in convoys going back and forth. And so, you don't see them initially because there's quite a big haze quite a lot of the time on the Persian Gulf because of the topography. So it's very shallow water, very hot temperatures. And then you've got this incredibly dramatic scenery on either side because you've got the mountains on the coast of Iran and then the mountains on the Musandam Peninsula. So that traps moisture above the surface of the water. So that actually makes it quite hard to see things. Obviously, drone technology can penetrate through that. Reapers are probably keeping some idea of what that is. But actually, if you want to try and take out boats that are laying mines, and these boats are laying mines just dropping the mines off the back of the boats. It's as simple as that. It's not a sophisticated operation. You hide the mines under tarpaulins, lift the tarpaulins, chuck the mines in. Is going to be very hard to, one, see that actually happening, and then secondly, take it out without causing civilian casualties to those smugglers around them.
Just listening to you then, so it's mainly, we think, I mean, I'm fascinated by two things. One, when you see them, when they see you, what the atmosphere is like. Is it hostility? Is it all smiles? And two, are we talking about mainly Iranians here? Because as I understand it, the subsidized oil that they can get, partly after the protest to kind of calm attempt by the regime to placate the people, lowering the price ongoing, and then they sell that oil and bought cheap in Iran, sold for profit, as you said, huge markup in the Gulf or beyond.
Yes. So they were actually incredibly friendly. So it's overwhelmingly Iranians coming across, but there are other nationalities involved from the Gulf side as well. So, I mean, you can't stop to have a conversation because these boats, I mean, they're literally flying out of the water. They're going at such speed. Everyone covers their face with scarves to stop the spray. And I think it's incredibly uncomfortable in those boats at that speed. But yes, this is an economy that is sustaining coastal communities, poor coastal communities in Iran. And it's also helping to sustain communities in poorer parts of the Gulf as well. And the area of Musandam has always looked to Iran. So, Oman has this historic relationship with Iran. There are a large number of Iranians who are there. Iran, along with Britain, helped to put down the Moscow-backed Dhofar rebellion in the 1970s, which, if that hadn't happened, could have left the Strait of Hormuz in Soviet hands, could have potentially changed the outcome of the Cold War. So, this is a flashpoint that has been a flashpoint for many decades. And again, the fate of the global economy seems to be hanging on it. But yes, this is an ancient, smuggling has gone on across this strait for a very, very long time. And now it's sort of taken on a different complexion, but you can't just wipe out this trade. And I think that's one of the many complexities that is facing the Americans as they try to deal with this. And again, of course, this is a big conventional navy, the largest conventional navy in history, trying to take on a mosquito fleet. And we've seen that it didn't work very well for the Russians in the Black Sea, where I was a few weeks ago with the Ukrainian Navy. And it's equally a problem for the Americans in the Persian Gulf.
So when we hear President Trump saying that what he calls the wise guy boats, the IRGC mosquito boats, you've kind of given us an indication of this is not going to be an easy task. You must have scratched your head and thought, well, how would they do that? Presumably there will be satellite tracking technologies, but what's your reading of that?
So, I'm not a military expert, but as I say, I think the main conclusion that I came away from, and then from talking to people who are military experts, is that this is going to be incredibly difficult. And, even if you do sort some of this problem, the prospect of getting rid of all of the boats is going to be very, very tricky. And it's going to be a problem in the future as well, because you're going to have this trade continuing, even if you somehow manage to stop the cross-border trade, and nobody's talking about trying to stop it. It will come back because communities depend on it. And then you can disguise the boats again, and you can easily throw more mines into the water. And, from some estimates, there are 5,000 to 6,000 mines in these this very narrow channel. Getting rid of them is going to take months. So we could be looking at a problem that is never going to go away, or is not going to go away in the next few years. This remains Iran's most potent weapon. Forget about the weapons of mass destruction, as people say. Iran now has a weapon of mass disruption, and it's going to be able to use that. There are going to be ways to get around it. Over time, there will be diminishing returns. But at the moment, Iran has maximum leverage, and it's very hard to see them, A, giving that up, and B, finding a way militarily to resolve that problem. And the mines are the biggest problem. In the Black Sea, it's easier to deal with. There are a lot of mines there, but you can find channels around it. In the Strait of Hormuz, where it's so narrow, that tiny choke point, persuading ships, persuading insurers, persuading shipping owners to let ships through is going to be much harder. And don't forget, in Ukraine, you have systems that are in place. You've got the Unity program where a lot of the risk is taken by the Ukrainian government and its backers. You're going to have to start looking at some of those kind of options on the insurance side, on the economic side, if you want to get traffic flowing through that strait again.
But that helps give us a much clearer picture, because if you suddenly we're now seeing a lot of, from what you've seen, that small traffic, those, the mosquito fleets, the smugglers' boats, and if, when you think about it, one might think, okay, it's a fairly complex operation to the Iranian mosquito boats, dead of the night, dropping mines in. But what you're suggesting is actually it's fairly easy. You just on a boat, dropping the mines off the back, and that's worth then considering for European, British militaries who might end up at some stage as part of the minesweeping operations.
Yes, and I think there is a lot of expertise when it comes to mining, and I think speaking from the British perspective, Britain has, despite the diminished nature of the Royal Navy and its fleet, it has played a vital role in the Black Sea in terms of training divers, in terms of technology, in terms of the deployment of uncrewed vessels. So progress is being made, but I think getting rid of all of those mines is going to be incredibly difficult, and it'll be fairly easy for Iran, should it choose to do so, to lay more in the future. So yes, I think that the situation feels like it's in rather a bind, and there's no obvious easy solution. I think with the use of AI, with the use of drones, it is going to be possible to pick out some of those boats, but the eradication of all of them is very difficult. And again, we've seen that in with the Russian Navy. A third of its Black Sea fleet has been sunk by a country, Ukraine, that no longer has a functioning navy. And not only that, Russia has been forced to push back its fleet behind its occupied behind occupied Crimea, its port at Sevastopol. It's all the way back in Novorossiysk, and Ukraine has control of large parts of the Black Sea, and the Houthis had control for a long time over parts of the Red Sea. So, opening up a stretch of waterway, particularly one as small as this, is very hard to see that being resolved quickly or cleanly.
It would be remiss of me not to ask you, Adrian, you talk about the Black Sea as well, just again from being there, comparing, contrasting the Black Sea, obviously a different war, different situation, but how much of a different view did you have being there? What were you seeing in the sea that you thought, actually, from reporting elsewhere and just from reporting on it straight, you just wouldn't have got? You wouldn't have had the same perspective.
From what I saw being on the Strait of Hormuz, well, as I say again, or do you mean in the Black Sea?
In the Black Sea, yeah. Remiss of me not to ask about the Black Sea. We'll be going to talking about it very soon with our Ukraine correspondent, but just that difference between reporting on it from afar and the perspective you've got by being there, watching operations ongoing.
Yes. So, I mean, again, I think it sort of reinforced some of what we knew, which was just this remarkable resourcefulness that the Ukrainians have shown with very few resources to take control, because of course they're not just trying to push the Russian Navy out of waters, but find ways to keep that crucial grain trade going. And I think what I found most striking was the fact that there was this incredible efficiency. Now, I mean, we were there during a very major air raid, but nonetheless, the ships were moving in and out, despite the fact that some ships were going to be struck at anchor while they're, not at anchor, but actually on the quays of the port. Another one struck a mine in the Black Sea. Ukraine has managed to keep that vital lifeline alive. And then I guess the second thing, which is rather different, was during this, was just to see, because the big problem is that although the Russian Navy doesn't get within sight of the shoreline for obvious reasons, Russian drones, Russian bombs, Russian missiles are still striking the port cities, particularly Odessa. But seeing the way that that Ukraine has created this shield, this sort of depth which we've not seen in the Gulf. So you've got boats out in the water shooting at Shahed drones, you've got the missile defense batteries, and you've got this incredible layer that starts from dozens of miles out. And one of the things, talking to people in Ukraine about what they said, is that, you know, what the Ukrainian advantage is that they've got what they call area defense. So any drone has to run through this gauntlet, particularly when they're coming across the Black Sea. Whereas in the Gulf, they're still focusing on what they call point defense. So they're defending basically individual installations, and that means that there's less there's less prospect of shooting things down. Obviously, the vast majority of what Iran has fired into different parts of the Gulf has been intercepted, but the success ratio is not as high as it is in Ukraine. And the Black Sea, what is, you know, of that mosquito fleet, plays a role not just in defending the waters of the Black Sea, but also the skies above it.
A final thought, Adrian, just give us an idea of reporting the Strait. There'll be a lot of reporters scratching their heads working out how to cover this. How difficult was it to get to, the considerations you were taking in to work out how to safely report?
Well, I can't go into too much detail on that because, you know, we did encounter some difficulties, and a lot of it is in terms of what you're able to then get out of it. But there are heavy restrictions on reporting in the Gulf. The guys who took us out are all fine. That all worked quite well. But I mean, there are just a series of challenges. Once you're actually in the area, people are perfectly friendly, but the authorities are not very keen on reporters being out there, and they will try and take various steps to prevent you from working easily, if I may say that.
Adrian, a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time tonight. Adrian Blomfield, Senior Foreign Correspondent at the Daily Telegraph. Thank you.